The Zetharians had seen many planets throughout their travels across the galaxy, each one with its own strange beauty and secrets. But Earth was different. When their scouts first noticed the blue planet circling a small, yellow star, they thought it was like any other primitive world. They had no idea that it would change everything they thought they knew about intelligent species. But Zetharians, a peaceful and advanced race, had always believed that war and violence were primitive instincts, things that no advanced civilization would ever need to resort to. Their history was one of harmony and progress. Conflict had no place in their world. Yet, when they received their first signals from Earth, they became intrigued. The humans were sending out weak radio waves, trying to communicate with other species. At first the Zetharians thought nothing of it, but as they watched, something strange began to stand out. The more they studied, the more they realized that humanity's history was one of constant struggle and conflict. Wars seemed to be the heartbeat of the planet. Every major event in human history seemed to revolve around some form of conflict between nations, between ideologies, and even between individuals. It wasn't just a passing phase for humanity. It was in their very nature. The Zetharians' initial curiosity turned to disbelief. How could a species survive with such a violent past? And why did they seem to thrive during times of war? The Zetharian leaders, puzzled by this discovery, decided to send a small diplomatic mission to Earth. Their goal was simple: observe, learn, and, if possible, open communication. They arrived cautiously, sending an ambassador to Earth's leaders. Their hopes were to make contact, share knowledge, and establish a peaceful relationship. They landed in a remote area of the planet, far from human civilization, and began gathering data. The first signs were unsettling. As the Zetharian ambassador observed, the humans seemed to be on the verge of conflict even in peaceful settings. Their cities were full of weapons, their military systems were highly advanced, and the history of their technological development was linked to their wars. Their most notable achievements, the ones that had defined their progress, were all born out of conflict. The Industrial Revolution, the discovery of new technologies, and even their space exploration were driven by the need for dominance and survival in a hostile world. The ambassador sent back reports, detailing his observations. The Zetharian leaders were shocked. These humans, they said, are not like us. They have evolved not through peace, but through war. Every generation builds on the destruction of the previous one. The more they studied, the clearer it became. War was not just a phase for humans, it was ingrained in their very biology. At first, the Zetharians thought it might be a misunderstanding, a result of their limited observations. But as they dug deeper, they found evidence that humanity's biology was also shaped by war. The way they fought, the way they strategized, the way they adapted to their enemies, all of it seemed to be part of who they were. The humans were not just violent, they were warriors at their core, built to fight and survive. It wasn't just about weapons or armies. It was about the human mind, the way they could think, adapt, and find creative solutions to problems that came from conflict. The Zetharians' initial thoughts about a peaceful, easy relationship with humanity began to crumble. They realized that if they were to make contact with humans, they couldn't treat them like any other species. There was something unique, something terrifying about this species, something they couldn't ignore. The humans weren't just a threat in the traditional sense. They were a force of nature, capable of unimaginable destruction and resilience. As the Zetharians prepared to return to their fleet and report their findings, they realized something even more terrifying. Humanity, a species built for war, had not only survived, had thrived, and that made them more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered. The Zetharians had come to study humanity, but what they had uncovered was far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. They had discovered a species that, whether by design or by nature, was made for one thing: war. The Zetharians knew that they had a choice to make. Should they continue their peaceful approach, or should they prepare for the unimaginable? Whatever they decided, one thing was certain: humanity's potential for war had changed the rules of the game. The universe would never be the same again. The more the Zetharians studied Earth, the clearer it became. Humanity's obsession with war wasn't just a passing phase, it was woven into their very DNA. The alien scientists pored over the data, reviewing centuries of human history, and each discovery seemed to confirm their darkest fears. Every major leap in human advancement had come on the back of conflict, whether it was the rise of empires through conquest, the development of new technologies born out of warfare, or the creation of entire cultures centered around battle and survival. It was as if war had shaped humanity's evolution, molding them into something no one could have anticipated. The Xatharians had long believed that a species' peaceful nature determined its survival and progression. But humanity had defied this logic. Every conflict, every war, seemed to push them forward, making them stronger, smarter, and more dangerous. The Xatharians were beginning to question their initial approach. Were they dealing with a race that had simply outgrown the need for war, or were they facing something far darker? The ambassador, who had been observing from a distance, sent a distressing report back to the fleet. The Xatharians had expected to witness the usual peaceful exchanges of knowledge and culture. Instead, they found humanity's willingness to fight, adapt, and overcome challenges to be far beyond what they had expected. In a brief period, they had developed weapons capable of mass destruction, not just for defense, but for conquest. Their ability to innovate in times of conflict was staggering. The Xatharians had never seen anything like it. One particular piece of technology that caught their attention was humanity's nuclear capabilities. These weapons of unimaginable power had been born out of human desperation, but their creators had refined them into a tool of absolute control. The Xatharians studied this weapon and began to understand the extent of humanity's potential. If they could use such power with a sense of purpose, how much further could they go? The humans had come to terms with their ability to destroy, but the Xatharians weren't so sure they understood the consequences of such power. Then there was the most chilling discovery. Humanity's drive for conflict wasn't just limited to war between nations or races, it was a part of their everyday lives. Even when not at war, humans thrived on competition and rivalry. Sports, games, politics, and even art often carried undertones of conflict and conquest. The way humans interacted, how they strived to be the best, to claim victory, showed that they could never truly escape the influence of war. It wasn't just something they did, it was how they existed. They were born into a world where conflict was inevitable, and they had learned to flourish in it. The Xatharians were left stunned, questioning everything they had believed about peace. The more they uncovered, the more terrified they became. What if this wasn't just a species with a violent past, but a species that was built for warfare? If humanity could adapt to such horrors, if they could thrive on war, what would happen when they met other species, other galaxies? What would happen if they ever turned their attention to the stars? The realization hit them like a thunderclap. Humanity wasn't just a species of warriors. They were a force of nature, unpredictable, dangerous, and relentless. The Xatharians' original mission to observe, to make peaceful contact, now seemed foolish. They were no longer just looking at a distant species from a safe distance. They were staring into the heart of a potential threat, a species that might one day be able to conquer entire worlds if left unchecked. As the ambassador prepared to return to the fleet, a deep unease settled over the Xath. They had underestimated humanity, and now they weren't sure what to do next. The humans had shown that war was more than a tool, it was an essential part of their existence. What kind of power could humanity wield if they ever turned their gaze beyond their world? What would it mean for the universe if they learned to spread that power? The Xatharians knew they had made a grave mistake. They had thought they were studying a primitive species, one that might eventually outgrow its violent past. Instead, they had uncovered a terrifying truth. Humanity wasn't just a species trying to survive. They were a species made for war, and that made them the most dangerous force the universe had ever seen. As the Xatharians delved deeper into their studies of humanity, the sense of dread among their leaders intensified. The reports from the ambassador and the research teams painted a clear and terrifying picture. Humanity wasn't just capable of war, it was designed for it. This wasn't merely a species that had adapted to conflict over time. It was a species that had been shaped by conflict itself, evolving in response to the pressures of survival, competition, and violence. The more they discovered, the more the Xatharians realized that Earth's inhabitants were unlike any other species they had encountered. They had an innate drive to dominate, to compete, and to conquer. The Xatharians had once believed that peaceful coexistence was the natural order of the universe, that every intelligent species, once advanced enough, would see the benefits of cooperation and collaboration. Yet, humanity had rejected this idea entirely. The notion of uniting for the common good was foreign to them. Instead, humans thrived on rivalry, on winning, on overcoming their enemies, even if it meant destroying them in the process. The Xatharians couldn't understand it. How could a species with such potential for destruction also possess such creativity, innovation, and resourcefulness? How could they possess such a deep, almost innate ability to adapt, evolve, and turn the tides of conflict in their favor? The Xatharians began to analyze humanity's ancient history more closely, searching for clues. They saw that early human civilizations had been constantly at war, not just with each other, but with the world itself. Wars over territory, over resources, over power. Conflict had been the driving force behind every major leap in human progress. The rise of agriculture, the birth of empires, the development of weapons and technologies, all of these had been born from the crucible of warfare. But what truly shook the Xatherians was the humans' remarkable resilience. Despite the vast destruction, the millions of lives lost, humanity always managed to rebuild, adapt, and come back stronger than before. It wasn't just the large-scale wars that concerned the Xatherians. They studied human nature on a deeper level. Humanity's propensity for conflict wasn't confined to global battles, it was embedded in their daily lives. Humans competed constantly, whether it was in politics, sports, business, or even in their social lives. Conflict wasn't something humans feared or avoided. It was something they thrived on. The Xatherians realized that every aspect of human life, from the smallest interaction to the largest global struggle, was driven by a need to assert power, control, and dominance. And this made humanity an unpredictable force. As the Xatherians analyzed Earth's advancements, they saw how war had not only spurred technology, but had also transformed human society in ways no other species had experienced. Humanity had developed nuclear weapons, not just as a means of defense, but as a show of power. They created machines of mass destruction, but also the means to heal their wounded and rebuild their cities. The paradox of humanity became clear to the Xatherians. They were a species capable of extraordinary creativity and empathy, yet their greatest breakthroughs were always tempered by the shadow of war. The Xatherians could no longer ignore the truth that had become painfully clear. Humanity was not just a threat in the traditional sense, they were an existential threat, not because they sought conquest, but because war was a part of them. What could the Xatherians do with this knowledge? Could they risk allowing such a species to grow unchecked, to expand across the stars, spreading their war-driven evolution to other civilizations? The dilemma weighed heavily on the Xatherian Council. A faction of their leaders argued that humanity should be eradicated, eliminated before they had the chance to spread their violent tendencies to other peaceful races. But another faction, one led by those who had hoped for peaceful contact, suggested that humanity's aggressive nature could be harnessed. Perhaps, if guided correctly, humanity could be made into an ally, a powerful force in a galaxy filled with other species. They could stand together, united against potential threats. But how could they control such a force? Time was running out. The Xatherians knew they had to act. The longer they waited, the stronger humanity would become, and the more dangerous they would be. It was clear that their peaceful approach had failed, and a decision had to be made either to destroy humanity or to try and tame it before it became a force too powerful to stop. But whichever path they chose, the Xatherians knew one thing for sure: the universe would never be the same again. Humanity had awakened something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. The tension in the Xatherian Council was palpable. For the first time in their history, they faced a true existential threat, not from a force of nature or an external enemy, but from a species that was born of conflict itself. The humans were unpredictable, relentless, and, most frighteningly, adaptable. The Xatherians had never encountered a species like them. There were no guarantees that the peaceful approach would work, no guarantees that humanity could be reasoned with. They had already proved that they thrived on chaos, on power struggles. The Xatherians realized that they had underestimated humanity at every turn. Commander the head of the Xatherian fleet, sat quietly in the council chamber, reviewing the most recent intelligence reports. The more he read, the more unsettling the truth became. Humanity wasn't just struggling with its violent tendencies, it was expanding. The conflict that had once been contained within the borders of Earth now threatened to spill over into the stars. Humanity had begun exploring space, sending probes, satellites, and ships to the far reaches of the galaxy. They were still in their early stages, but their speed and ambition were unparalleled. The Xatherians realized that if humanity continued at this rate, they would soon encounter other civilizations, and if their history was any indication, war would soon follow. The implications of this were devastating. If humanity continued its expansion unchecked, it would only be a matter of time before they came into contact with other peaceful species. And the Xatherians, who had always prided themselves on their calm, diplomatic approach to intergalactic relations, were certain that humanity's natural instinct to conquer would lead to nothing but bloodshed and destruction. The galaxy, as they knew it, could unravel in a matter of decades. Back on Earth, the humans had already begun to notice strange phenomena in their skies. Unexplained signals, Mysterious ships that appeared without warning. Something was happening. And they knew it wasn't just the ordinary course of space exploration. Governments and military leaders across the planet began to piece together the possibility of alien contact. While some humans hoped for peaceful interaction, others feared what the Zetherians had already begun to suspect. The humans' greatest asset, their will to fight, to survive, to dominate, might be what made them a threat to the entire universe. At the same time, factions within the Zetherian Council began to clash. One group, led by the more idealistic members, continued to advocate for peaceful coexistence. They believed that humanity, with its vast potential, could be swayed from its violent ways. Perhaps with guidance, humanity could be taught to harness its aggression for more noble purposes. But this viewpoint was losing ground fast. Commander Lothar and his supporters argued that the only logical path was to strike before humanity had the chance to spread. Their aggressive nature, Lothar believed, could never be tamed. It was only a matter of time before humanity's violent impulses would turn toward the stars. As these internal debates raged, the humans continued to press forward with their technological advances. They had developed faster than light travel, a leap that would change the game entirely. What had once been a species confined to their own world was now on the cusp of becoming an interstellar force. The Zetherians knew they had to act soon, before humanity's reach outstripped their ability to control it. The moment of truth arrived when the Zeth received a direct message from Earth. It wasn't a diplomatic message or a request for peaceful contact. It was a challenge. Humans, having discovered that they were being observed, had decided to make their presence known. The message was simple, yet chilling. We are coming. Prepare yourselves. The Zetherians felt a chill run through their ranks. This was no longer just about observing and understanding humanity. The humans were coming in. They were coming with their full force. The message wasn't a threat, but it carried with it the weight of humanity's determination and their readiness to take what they believed was theirs. It was a challenge to the Zetherians' way of life, and it left them with a stark realization. They had miscalculated. Humanity wasn't looking for guidance. They were looking for conquest. Now, the Zetherians had to decide. The time for diplomacy was over. The question was no longer whether humanity could be reasoned with, but whether they could be stopped before they wreaked havoc on the galaxy. The Zetherians had only one choice left: to prepare for war or to face an enemy that would never be defeated. The message from humanity had struck like a hammer, sending shockwaves through the Zetherian leadership. The humans weren't waiting for permission, nor were they seeking guidance. They had seen the universe's vastness and, with their innate drive for dominance, had made their intentions clear. We are coming. Prepare yourselves. The words echoed through the Zetherian fleet's communication systems, and a deep, unsettling silence fell over their command centers. Commander Lothar knew the time for cautious observation had passed. The Zetherians had learned all they could from their studies of humanity, but nothing had prepared them for the resolve they saw in those simple words. The humans were not afraid. They were not retreating into fear of the unknown. They were advancing, boldly asserting their place in the cosmos. It was something the Zetherians had never expected, nor had they ever faced. How could they handle a species that was, by nature, so driven to fight? Across the Zetherian fleet, commanders and strategists began preparing for the inevitable. The once peaceful galaxy was about to change forever. Their mission had always been to maintain harmony, to preserve balance between species. Now, however, they were faced with a species that had evolved in a perpetual state of conflict. The universe was vast, and humanity was coming for a piece of it, while the Zetherians made their plans. Earth's governments were in chaos. The realization that humanity was now on the precipice of becoming a galactic power caused a frenzy of excitement and fear. Some factions within humanity celebrated, eager to expand their reach, while others feared the consequences of their actions. It was clear that humanity's thirst for power, to conquer, to prove themselves in the vast expanse of space, could no longer be contained. Humanity's technological leaps, powered by their constant drive to overcome each other, had given them the ability to reach the stars. Their faster-than-light travel was already being tested, and soon their ships would be traveling to the outer reaches of the galaxy. It wasn't just about discovering new worlds anymore. It was about asserting humanity's place within it. Earth was no longer the only prize they sought. Back in the Zetherian fleet, Commander Lothar addressed his council. Their options were limited, and the threat that humanity represented loomed larger with every passing moment. "We have one choice," he said, his voice calm but with the weight of uncertainty. "We cannot let them become what we fear most, a race that spreads their war-driven nature across the stars. We will act now, before they have the chance to reach other peaceful worlds. There was no denying it anymore. The Zetherians had underestimated humanity, and now they were preparing for a war they never anticipated. They would confront humanity head, using their advanced technology and military might to contain the threat before it could expand any further. But, even as Lothar gave the orders to prepare the fleet for conflict, a growing sense of doubt gnawed at him. Could they truly defeat humanity in a war? The humans had no limits when it came to fighting. They would not stop until they had conquered, adapted, and evolved to overcome the most insurmountable of obstacles. The Zetherians, once proud of their peacekeeping abilities, now had to confront the terrifying truth that their approach to the galaxy might have been fundamentally flawed. Peace had worked for them, but it had not worked for humanity. The Zetherians couldn't allow themselves to fall into the same cycle of war. But could they stop humanity's endless march toward dominance? Could they hold back a species whose greatest strength lay in its instinct to survive and dominate? As the Zetherian fleet prepared for battle, they knew that they were about to face a force unlike any they had ever encountered, one that was not driven by greed or hate, but by an unshakable desire to become more, to conquer, to win. And so, the Zetherians stood on the precipice of war, knowing that humanity was not a species they could simply reason with or avoid. The time had come. The universe's balance was about to be shattered by a force they never saw coming, a force built for war. And in that war they would discover the terrifying truth. There was no peace to be found in humanity's future. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than expected. Humanity, with its unstoppable momentum, had made its move. Their fleet, newly built with advanced technology and driven by their innate need for expansion, surged into space, preparing to stake their claim among the stars. The Zetherian fleet had been positioned, ready for a confrontation that they had hoped to avoid. Yet, deep down, Commander Lothar knew there was no avoiding it anymore. The stakes had grown too high. The first signs of humanity's approach came in the form of a massive, shining ship, a symbol of humanity's ambition. It was not a warship in the traditional sense, not a vessel built to destroy, but a ship built to assert. Its presence in the vast emptiness of space felt different from everything the Zetherians had encountered. It wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. Humanity was here to take what they believed was rightfully theirs. Inside the Zetherian command center, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. As the Zetherians tracked the human fleet's movement, they noted how organized it was, far more efficient than they expected. The humans were not disjointed in their approach, not divided by internal squabbles. They had rallied together for a singular purpose, to prove that they were meant to dominate the galaxy. The Zetherians, who had always believed that the strength of peace lay in unity, now found themselves facing an enemy that didn't need unity to be strong. Humanity thrived on competition and chaos, and in that chaos they found power. The fleet's arrival was a calculated move. The humans had already established a presence in several neighboring systems, and now they had turned their eyes toward Zeth. As the Zetherians initiated first contact, there was no hope for peaceful negotiation. Humanity was already committed to the idea that they were the rightful rulers of the stars. The initial exchange of words was cold and short. The Zetherians asked for cooperation, to unite against potential cosmic threats. Humanity responded with a simple declaration: "We don't need your help, we need your planet." The message was a slap in the face, a brutal reminder of how humanity viewed its place in the universe. There would be no treaties, no alliances. There was only one goal: to conquer. The Zetherians tried to respond diplomatically, hoping to avert violence, but humanity had already moved beyond diplomacy. The fight was on, and it was going to be brutal. The first attack came swiftly and without warning. Humanity's weaponry, once thought primitive by the Zetherians, now proved to be devastatingly effective. Their strategy was simple: overwhelm with sheer force. Humanity had mastered the art of war, and the Zetherians, with all their technological might, found themselves pushed to the brink. The Zetherians' peaceful nature had not prepared them for the level of brutality that humanity was willing to unleash. Us as the battle unfolded in real time, the Zetherians began to see the true depth of humanity's power. This wasn't just a military assault, it was a psychological war. The Zetherians were constantly on the back foot, reacting to humanity's every move, forced to fight on humanity's terms. Their strategies, built on decades of peace, could not match the ruthlessness that humanity was capable of. The Zetherians' ships, elegant and graceful, were no match for the sheer aggression and unpredictability of the human fleet. The Zetherians fought back valiantly, but the odds were stacking against them. The battle turned into a desperate struggle for survival. As the Zetharians scrambled to hold their ground, they realized with growing horror that humanity's drive for war was not just an instinct, it was a weapon. The humans were not afraid to sacrifice everything for victory. They did not hesitate to push forward, knowing that in their victory, they would prove to the galaxy that they were the ones who controlled their fate. In the chaos of the battle, Commander Lothar made a grim decision. The Zetharians were losing, and they were losing quickly. If humanity wasn't stopped, they would not just conquer Zethar, they would become a force too powerful to contain. Lothar, seeing no other option, ordered a full retreat. It was the hardest decision he had ever made, but it was the only choice left to preserve what little was left of the Zetharian people. As the Zetharians pulled back into the vastness of space, they were left with the grim realization that the galaxy as they knew it had changed forever. Humanity had entered the fray, and with them came the terrifying truth. Their destiny was not shaped by peace, but by war. And now, with the Zetharians in retreat, humanity was free to continue its march across the stars, unstoppable and unrelenting. The universe had just been set on a new course and humanity was in control. The retreat was a bitter one, but Commander Lothar knew it was the only option left. The Zetharian fleet had taken heavy losses, their ships battered and their morale shattered. As they retreated into the cold expanse of space, there was no celebration, no relief, only the grim realization that the universe they had known, one built on cooperation, peace, and the belief in mutual respect, had crumbled before them. Humanity had shattered that fragile peace in a single, brutal onslaught. But as Lothar stared out at the stars from his flagship, a part of him couldn't help but admire humanity's raw determination. It was something the Zetharians had never truly understood until now, an unyielding drive, a refusal to accept anything less than victory. Humanity didn't just fight to survive, they fought to win. They fought to prove that they were destined to control their fate, to bend the universe to their will. And in that fight, they had shown no mercy. The Zetharians, for all their technology, for all their peaceful intentions, had underestimated humanity's capacity for warfare. They had made the mistake of believing that conflict was something that could be left behind, something that was merely a phase in a species' development. But humanity's very nature had been shaped by war. It wasn't just a part of their history, it was ingrained in them. And now, the Zetharians had learned this lesson the hard way. Back on Earth, the human leadership was already moving forward. News of the victory over the Zetharians spread like wildfire, uniting humanity with a sense of purpose they hadn't known in years. The victory wasn't just about defeating the Zetharians, it was about proving humanity's place in the galaxy. No longer would they be looked down upon as a fledgling species. No longer would they be dismissed as primitive or unworthy of the stars. Humanity had shown that they could stand toe-to-toe with the most advanced species in the galaxy and come out on top. The decision to push forward with their interstellar ambitions was now inevitable. With the Zetharians' retreat, humanity was free to expand, to claim what they believed was theirs by right. The first steps toward colonizing distant worlds began immediately. Plans were drawn up for the construction of new colonies, and fleets were being readied to explore uncharted territories. But even as the excitement of their victory filled the air, there was a deep undercurrent of uncertainty. The Zetharians had been only the beginning. Humanity had proved itself capable of war, but they had also made enemies. There were other species out there, species who might not take kindly to humanity's sudden and aggressive rise to power. As humanity's fleets spread across the stars, they encountered new worlds, new species, and new challenges. Some welcomed them, seeing the potential for cooperation, while others watched with growing unease. But one thing became clear: humanity had found its place in the galaxy, not as peaceful diplomats or humble explorers, but as conquerors, fearless, ruthless, and ready to fight for their dominance. After retreating to the safety of their homeworld, could only watch as humanity's power grew. There was little left they could do to stop them. The Zetharians had failed to contain humanity's rise, and now they were left to wonder what would happen when the next species realized the truth. The Zetharians had fought for peace, but humanity's violent nature had shattered the status quo. The universe, once peaceful and divided by quiet treaties, was now a battlefield, where the strongest would determine the future. The Zetharians' final decision, to retreat and watch humanity's march across the galaxy, was made with a heavy heart. They knew that they could never go back to the way things were. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had proven that war was not just something they could endure, it was something they could master. And now, it was their galaxy to shape, for better or for worse. The Zetharians could only hope that the rest of the universe would survive the storm humanity was about to unleash.